Yo, and hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of the League of Fantasy Legends podcast. We're going to look back at week 6, the last week of the regular season of your fantasy LCS leagues, and then it is playoffs week. So we are going to look forward to week 7, get your lineup set so you can win your playoff matchups. We've got another guest today. He goes by Odin14, or at least that's how I know him. Odin, what's going on, man? How are you?
Hey, how's it going? Glad to be here.
Hey, it's going good. My main job's about to pick up, so I'm enjoying my last little bit of summer before I have to start working all the time, but things are good. Hey, what should we call you? Is Odin good?
Odin's good. Yeah, Odin's great. Yeah, I feel you with that. I'm a teacher, so we're right about to get ready to hit the swing again as well.
That's right. Hey, so how long do you play League? And did you ever play League? What's your history with League?
So I used to play League a little bit back in college. My roommates got me into it in like 2011, 2012-ish. They played a lot all throughout college. I kind of tapered off playing. I wasn't that great at it, and I didn't really like getting locked into 30-minute games, but I always found watching it really entertaining, especially when fantasy came around. We would do a lot of that around 2014, 2015. We'd watch a lot. And we did the fantasy when that first came out, and that really got me into watching the game. So I fell in love with the strategy and just the gaming aspect of it. But I wasn't good enough to really play, so I don't really play a ton.
Listen, I'm not good enough to play either, but I still do it. Are you saying you've been playing fantasy LCS since like 2014?
On and off. So we played for a split when it first came out, like on the League of Legends website.
Yeah, if I remember right, it was kind of a buggy mess.
It was a buggy mess, but it was cool because it was LEC and LCS together, kind of like our Dynasty League, which was really cool. So we watched a lot. And then we played that for a couple seasons. Then we fell off a bit as some of my college friends got more into jobs and different stuff like that. But one of my buddies got me back into it during the pandemic and brought back the league when Sleeper came around. And so we got back into the fantasy when Sleeper came back out with a fantasy app, and then been playing ever since.
Ah, that's sweet. So you actually got a lot more experience than I do on this. Do you do other fantasy sports? Are you a fantasy football guy?
I'm a big fantasy sports person, so yeah, I'm in baseball leagues, football leagues, hockey leagues. I'm pretty much in a fantasy sport every season.
Nice, I love that. So do you have a favorite LCS team? Have you kind of taken to one specifically?
Not really. Since I've gotten back into it, honestly, I tend to follow the LEC a little bit more. When it comes to the LCS, I really like the underdog teams, so I really got into Evil Geniuses when they kind of stunned everybody in the spring. Last year, I was big into 100 Thieves when they kind of stunned everybody and kind of went from this team that nobody had big expectations for to then all of a sudden winning summer, and it helped that I had a lot of them on my team. I was able to... Luckily, they just kind of fell into my lap because nobody was picking 100 Thieves, so It kind of really depends on who's on my fantasy team. Like, Danny was on my team in the spring, and then they went on their run, and I was like, oh, cool. Now I'm kind of more a hybrid of 100 Thieves, but I really do like watching EG. It's harder to root for them since I don't have anybody on. They all got swept up real quick, so.
Yeah, they're not the underdog anymore.
No, exactly.
So I feel like you got to be like a CLG or a FlyQuest guy for this split.
I like FlyQuest a lot for this split. I've been rooting for them. Nobody had Takui in one of my leagues, and so I picked him up. Been a big FlyQuest guy. CLG, I don't know. I think it's just a bias from watching them in the past. Like,
so
I just never really
when they
when they were kind of like a dominant team.
The double lift days.
Yep. Same with Liquid. Yes, with the double lift days. Same with Liquid. I just have bad tastes in my mouth from previous years and stuff. Even though they're completely different teams now, I just never really can get myself to follow them.
You know, I get it for Liquid, but CLG's been so bad for so long. It feels totally different to me, at least.
It's true. I think what happened this split for me is I was expecting CLG to be so bad, and then they were good. I didn't know what to like. Should I grab them? Should I not grab them? Yep. And then they kind of tapered off, and I was like, nah, it's just being CLG again. But I don't know. They've kind of surprised this last week. They were pretty good, so we'll see.
Yeah, for sure. You are also in this Dynasty League that we've talked a lot about on our podcast. Mm-hmm. Obviously, we started a little late into the split, so we only had 3 weeks of a regular season, but that is done. We're into the playoffs, and when I say we, I mean you, because I did not make the playoffs.
And I'm sorry that I knocked you out of the playoffs last week. I felt bad, especially knowing that I was going to be coming on the pod this week, but I'll take the playoff spot.
You know what? I would blame you, except for all my blame is going to Caps because I picked him 3rd overall and he was the worst player of the week. Like, out of every player started on the 8 teams, he was the lowest scoring. So It's no one's fault but Caps. What does your Dynasty team look like? Do you like it? Are you hopeful for a playoff victory?
I do. I'm in a little sticky situation, though, because all of my eggs are in the Mad Lions basket in the LEC. And I'm a big Mad Lions fan. That's a team I really latched onto when I kind of got back into watching League, especially during the pandemic. I watched more LEC because they were on Friday afternoons, so I was able to watch some more of those games. Really liked them, really became a big Mad Lions fan. Again, they were an underdog, ended up winning, go to Worlds, did really well. They were bad in the spring, so I was able to get some good Mad Lions players that nobody was really looking at. They've been really, really good, but that's been the bulk of what's holding up, so if they have a bad week, then I'm toast.
How's their schedule looking? Have you looked?
This week, it's looking like they should be okay. Again, with the LEC, it's the top teams anybody can win in any week. They've looked pretty dominant, though, these past couple weeks, so I kind of equate them. They're kind of like the EG of the LEC, the Europe League right now, I think. So you want to kind of stack as many of them as you can. So we'll see. Hopefully they keep rolling, but you never know.
So are you starting 3 Mad Lions this week or just 2?
I am. Yeah, so the past 2 weeks I've had 3. So the jungler, the mid laner, and the AD carry. I have all 3 of them.
I'm looking at your roster, and it looks like you have Upset for Fnatic, and you certainly can't play him.
No, they've been so bad. And where you were upset with Caps as a 3rd, I took Upset as the 2nd, started him week 1, and he was terrible, and I ended up losing that week. So I've been riding Mad Lions ever since.
Hey, if it works, it works.
Absolutely.
Yeah, anything else you want to touch on before we get into the recap and the preview?
No, I think we're good. Let's get into it.
Sweet. So this first part, what I want to do, I want to look at, in the LCS, we've got a couple different races. I've never seen the standings be so segmented between tiers. It seems like there's 3 tiers. The first tier, it's EG and 100 Thieves pretty much by themselves. So they've got a 2-game gap between 100 Thieves and then 3rd place. In that 3rd through 6th range, Team Liquid, CLG, C9, and FlyQuest, all within 1 game of each other. And then there's a 3-game gap between 6 and 7. I don't think I've ever seen such a big gap in between a random spot in the standings, other than like between 1 and 2 or 9 and 10.
It seems like there's very distinct tiers this split. There's some very not great teams, and then everybody else is in that like middle. Obviously EG has been dominant pretty much all split. This week I feel like they had a little bit of a hiccup, but it definitely seems like compared to other splits in the past, this is like the most separated I think the good teams are from the bad teams.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like we're seeing less upsets of the bottom teams taking games off the top. I feel like we always see that, and just not as much this split.
Yep, I agree.
So a couple different races. Obviously, the race to win the regular season between EG and 100 Thieves. Do you give 100 Thieves a shot? They just beat Evil Geniuses 2 weeks ago. What do you think?
I actually do. I didn't think that EG played great this week, and I'll kind of touch on it when we get into our top performers of the week. I feel like they didn't look great. They ended up winning both of their games, but it didn't really blow me away. Whereas I feel like 100 Themes is kind of catching up with the meta. I feel like in the beginning of the split, they didn't really have a good grasp on the meta, or something was just kind of slightly off. Abba obviously wasn't playing great, but he's looked a bit better, and I just feel like as a unit they've looked a lot more cohesive, especially getting back to like their roots of being good team fighters. So I think they do definitely have a chance at catching EG. I feel like EG's they had such a hot start. Obviously they're 11-2. They've only lost 2 games, one of those being to 100 Thieves, but I definitely would give 100 Thieves a good chance at pulling out a victory.
Yeah, 100 Thieves is on a bit of a run. They've won, I believe, 4 in a row, and specifically this week, it seems like they've got their play style figured out.
Yep, I think so too. I think that they've kind of finally figured out what they want to do with this meta, and it's showing, I think, their cohesiveness they've been played together for 4 straight splits now, so.
The problem from my perspective is that even though it feels like they've kind of figured out their thing, I think their niche, the way they're playing, is maybe the worst fantasy output for a winning team I've ever seen.
Oh, yes.
It brings me back. I'm not sure if you remember these days of the lethality Varus, where nobody ever fought,
Yes.
and Varus would just poke someone to 1/3 HP and then take whatever objective it was.
Yep.
I specifically remember a game that ended like 4-3. And so ever since those days, I feel like these are the kind of the slowest games that 100 Thieves are playing. I feel like they got a lot of criticism this week for that, even against teams that aren't necessarily any good. And that second game was kind of brutal to watch, to be honest.
Honestly, I feel like the only team that's really been good when it comes, like, we obviously you see it in the standings for fantasy, but like EG is the only game that it seems like in those games, like the kills get racked up. I feel like all the other games, especially Liquid games, 100 Thieves games, after like 20 minutes, it's like 3-2 in kill wise. Like it's so slow with this current meta.
And I think that's kind of shown in that LEC players are doing way better than LCS players in our Dynasty League.
Yeah, most weeks, except for one, I think I've started all LEC players instead of any LCS players. For that reason, it seems like there's much more kills, much more action going, much more team fighting.
Yeah, I'm going to have to ask old Ferris Biscuit to run some stats on that, because I don't know it for sure, but it definitely feels true.
Yeah.
So, are you picking 100 Thieves, or you just think they have a chance?
I just think they have a chance. I'm still putting EG at the top. I want to get one more week. I think this next week will be pivotal, especially looking at their matchup against Team Liquid. If they look bad again, in my opinion, like they kind of looked shaky last week, it might change it. But I'm sticking with EG for now. But I definitely think 100 Thieves has a chance.
Yeah, I'm doing the same. I do like 100 Thieves. I always have, but I just think EG is too much. The next race, we're looking at third place, or I suppose third and fourth, which gets you in that upper part of the bracket. Team Liquid, CLG, C9, all 8-5, all really having a different feel to the trajectory of where they're headed. And then FlyQuest, one game back at 7-6. Who do you have there at 3-4, or who do you think will finish at 3-4?
So I'm really thinking Cloud9's going to finish at 3. I thought they looked really good this last week against two good teams in FlyQuest and in Team Liquid. I thought they looked really dominant against Team Liquid. I feel like they really had that game in the bag. Obviously, they got pretty much every single objective in that game. But I think they're finally, again, kind of like 100 Thieves figuring it out, but also we knew they were going to get off to a slow start with the Sven and the Berserker, visa issues and lost passports, but I feel like they're now finally putting it all together, except for a couple games here or there where they just looked bad. Since the team unit's been together, they've looked better for the most part. So I'm going to give the edge to C9, and then I have Liquid after them. I think there's just too much talent on Liquid, but I don't love their playstyle, and I haven't loved their cohesive look this split.
Yeah, Team Liquid has gone 1-1 each of the last 5 weeks after a 3-0 start in the first Super Week. So kind of crazy that they've been so consistently mediocre, I suppose.
Yeah, and it gives me shades from Spring, too. Like, I feel like in Spring, it was kind of the same thing, and everybody's like, oh, well, yeah, their first time together, they're going to look so much better in the summer, and the first week, like you said, it did look like, okay, maybe they have put it all together. They spent so much time. I think they spent a little time in Korea really working together. And then lately it's been like, oh no, this is just kind of back to that boring kind of play style where they don't get destroyed, but even in their victories, they don't look like they're dominating teams either.
Definitely. And looking at, from a fantasy perspective, I'm looking at Team Liquid because I was curious to see how their players are performing. So Bjergsen has been good. He's sitting at second, just a couple points per game behind JoJo. But across the board, otherwise, Bwipo is fourth, Santorin is fourth, Hansama is fifth. And so they actually have not been good for fantasy either, which if you've watched their games and you're paying attention, that shouldn't really surprise you. But compared to preseason expectations, pretty disappointing.
Absolutely, and I think that this meta also hurts them because I think they're trying to play that slow, just like drag it out game style. So in the games that they win, they're not really team fighting a ton, and so they're not racking up a ton of points. Like they'll get some objective points that way, but they're not really, like in their games, I feel like there's never high kill totals. So in the games that they win, it seems like they kind of steamroll, just win. In the games that they lose, like they're not getting those early game objectives, and then they just kind of fade. And again, they're not getting ton of points.
Right. I think C9 at 3 is definitely the way to go. I think that's just where things have been kind of pointing. But I think I'm going to go with CLG at 4, just because I kind of hate the way that Team Liquid has been kind of looking over the past couple weeks. I'm looking at their schedule this week. They still have FlyQuest on Saturday and EG on Sunday. Looks like another 1-1 week, but I could see them going 0-2 and falling a couple games behind. And I really like what CLG has been doing. I'm hoping they can pull off an upset this week against C9. We'll see. But I like CLG. I'm really hoping they'll finish 4th.
Yeah, I do like CLG. Again, they haven't, like, in their games, like, I feel like it's a tale of two teams with them. Like, in their games that they've beaten those kind of top tier teams, they look amazing and they give me that hope of, okay, CLG, they're a legit contender. But then there are some other games that they just get blown away and it hasn't been all that inspiring. And especially, I try not to buy in too much. I mean, they're coming off a week where they've placed Golden Guardians and Dignitas, and yeah, they look dominant in those games. But then there's other games against like FlyQuest and some of those other top tier teams where they've just looked bad.
For sure. The last race is for 7th and 8th. So 7th and 8th will make it into playoffs, right into the lower bracket. Looking at the teams in the race there, you have Golden Guardians and TSM at 4 and 9, Immortals at 3 and 10, and then Dignitas at 2 and 11. Dignitas has looked horrible, to be honest, and River's gone, so both looking bad and trying to get new team chemistry. Who do you think finishes at 7 and 8?
I actually think 7. I'm going to go with Immortals. I think they've looked really good these last couple weeks ever since the break. They haven't gotten a ton of wins, but they've looked much better. Like, they're actually seem to be competing with those top tier teams. And then I'm going to give it to Golden Guardians. TSM looked good in their second game. There's just been so much turnover. I just don't think I don't think they're going to be able to put it all together towards the end of the split. So I'm going to go Immortals 7 and then Golden Guardians kind of scraping through with that 8 spot.
You know, you said Golden Guardians looked good in their game on Sunday that they won. That was against Golden Guardians. You're still taking Golden Guardians even after TSM smacked them?
I am.
I agree with you with Immortals at 7. I think that is the way to go. I think that they've been looking good. I've been on Immortals the whole split, really, with the exception of when they were the worst fantasy LCS team in the history of the LCS. But besides that, I've really liked Immortals. I think Kenvy's been looking really good, and so I'm excited for that. 8 is the hardest one for me. I think I'm going to go TSM.
I can see TSM pulling it through. I actually hope TSM pulls it through. I'm not a huge Golden Guardians fan. I don't really they never inspire me to like root for them, if that makes sense. Like, their games just never really wow me. I'm a big Spica fan, so I would love to see TSM pull it through. I just don't know with all the changes if I think they had that really good game against Golden Guardians, but I don't know if it's enough to convince me that they're going to pull it through like this week or next week.
Right, and with Golden Guardians, I was always a Pride Stalker fan. I kind of liked that he had, and we didn't see it so much this split, but kind of that different champion pool he could use to really put his own flavor on the game. But with him being gone and River coming in, I think Golden Guardians also has some adjusting to do. So I think I am going to stick with TSM. But I think it'll be really interesting.
Absolutely.
And I will say, if it is Immortals in that 7 spot, that top team better watch out, because I think Immortals can win a playoff series if things go right.
Absolutely. And again, they've, like, even the 2 games that they lost this week, like, they were in it for a good chunk of the game. I think they can be a dangerous team going into playoffs.
Absolutely. So we're going to look back at the week that just happened. Who are the duds? Who are the studs? And then who is our player of the week? Who are some duds that stuck out to you?
So definitely Instinct. I think he was not great. And Bwipo. Bwipo, I feel like in that TSM game just almost gave away the game to TSM.
Well, that was such a weird game. They almost split the map right in half, and Bwipo and Instinct just kind of got murdered over and over. Like, they were both getting murdered at the same time.
Yep. I thought that they weren't great. Thinking back on some of the other ones, I didn't think FlyQuest had very good games. That second game, I feel like they just kind of mailed it in. And even I'm a huge Takui fan, and he just did not look very good. And he didn't really help me in some of my fantasy leagues either because he was so bad, which is just abnormal from him. So I'm expecting him to kind of bounce back this week after a down week.
Yeah, he did more than not help. He actively hurt you with a total of 14 points over 2 games. Like, unacceptable. Couple really, really bad top lane performances this week. I'm looking at Impact. They went against Immortals. He went 1-8-4. So he had 17 points, but 11 of those were from the team points. So really about as bad of a game as you can have in a win. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at Hoon, who made his LCS debut for Dignitas in place of Gamsu. He went 0-6-1 on the Gnar, a couple really questionable deaths, scored 3 points. That was pretty rough. And then Licorice from Golden Guardians. Obviously, all of Golden Guardians had a pretty poor week. They went 0-2. But Licorice had the worst week of the split of any player. He, in both games, went 0-4-0.
Yeah, he was just bad and just not good, which was actually good for me, because even though Takui played bad, Licorice played worse, and I was facing the team with Licorice, and that helped me actually make it sneak into the playoffs in that league, because Licorice was so bad. And it's sad to me because I liked Licorice when he was on C9, and I feel like he's just not that same player anymore.
You know, fantasy-wise, he'd actually been pretty good. When Biscuit was on here, he talked about how Licorice was the top scoring player on Golden Guardians, which is really weird for a top laner. But after a week where he combined to score 1 point, there's no way that's still true.
Right.
And then the last thing I want to mention, we already talked about it a little bit, but 100 Thieves had the lowest scoring win that I've ever seen. Their scores from top to bottom, 20, 12, 13, 17, and 2. A player from a winning team scored 2 points.
Right.
Just kind of unbelievable.
And especially from, like, Huni is, like, one that you typically target as a support, because usually he gets a couple kills and can really score you some points. But yeah, that game was weird. Definitely.
How about some top performers, some studs? Who do you feel like really stood out this week?
So for me, I mean, this is a player who's been good all split, but Inspired, again, like I was kind of talking about earlier, I feel like EG as a team wasn't very good, and we kind of talked about how bad Impact played this week. I feel like the rest of EG didn't play exceptionally well, but I feel like they could have gone 0-2 without, if Inspired didn't do what he did in those games when it came to, I think, the Elder steal that he had that really turned that game around.
Just crushing for someone rooting for Immortals, just a crushing steal and a great
Absolutely. Play. And especially it looked like Immortals was going to pull it off. And then I think had Immortals gotten that Elder, then they win that game.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So I think Inspired really stuck out to me. And then in the second game too, I feel like, again, they were kind of not doing much all across the board except for Inspired.
Yeah, he definitely kind of jungle gapped Jose in that game, which I'm a big Jose Deodo fan, but he got gapped that game.
Yep. Another one for me was Revenge. Again, I know both of us have talked really highly about Immortals. I was big on Revenge in the spring and then in last season too, but I feel like he really has stepped it up and looked really good this week.
Yeah, Revenge, I think that's a good one to call out. He scored about as well as you can in an 0-2 week. He went 33 and then 15, so almost 50 points from a player who didn't get a win this week is actually really impressive.
Yep. And I think that's what Immortals kind of has to do, is get back to playing around him. Because when he's good, I think they can be a scary, scary team.
A couple other players. EG is on this list again. Really strong week. Kind of unspectacular to their standards, but their standards are so much higher than everybody else's. CLG had a 2-0 week, which we predicted on this podcast if you're listening last week.
Yep.
And they had the scores to go along with it. Dokla had the 39 and 34, so really good. Palafox 42 and 32. Luger 25 and then 48 on that Draven game against Dignitas, where Draven did what Draven wants to do. He got the early kills. He cashed out his passive. I'm fairly sure he was on 2 items before Spawn had even gotten his first, or maybe at the same time. Kind of just a crazy good Draven carry performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he looked really good on the Draven.
And then the last team, they were definitely the fantasy team of the week. We've already talked about them. It's C9. They're on a 4-game win streak. We talked about last week how they looked pretty poor in their 2 wins. This week, not at all. And their fantasy scores were even better than CLG's. Pretty much across the board. Fudge with a 35 and a 37. Blabber was awesome with a 40 and a 45. And if you didn't see that Olaf game against FlyQuest, you need to watch it. What that guy can do on Olaf is just ridiculous.
Blabber he's fantastic. Absolutely fantastic.
In the mid lane, Jensen went 47 and 46, so consistent and really good. Sven 33 and 37. And that brings us to the LFL Pod Fantasy Player of the Week. It's Berserker. I think this is the first time in the history of the podcast, obviously just this year, that the Fantasy Player of the Week has matched with the LCS Player of the Week. I like to be a little bit contrarian. I don't really like to do that, but I don't think you can argue with the fantasy scores on Berserker this week. He did not die. Game 1, 6-0 and 8 for a 49 on the Zeri. Obviously, that's the game he had the pentakill.
That pentakill was insane. So good.
You know, he did a good job of kind of waiting out that first bit. FlyQuest overextended in between the towers to try to get that first kill, and then it was just all over.
Yep.
Second game, he was 8-0 and 6 for a 56-point game on the Callista. That's one of the best games we've had of the whole split. So over 100 points this week for Berserker. I think we had no choice but to make him the LFL Pod Fantasy Player of the Week.
Absolutely. Absolutely. He was godlike this week.
I think personally, if I were voting on the LCS Player of the Week, I think you've already mentioned it, but I think Inspired probably kind of deserved it. I think he had a really nice week, but he's already won it twice.
Yep. And again, like I said, I don't think he outplayed Berserker necessarily, game-wise, but I think without Inspired, I think EG goes 0-2 this week.
Right. So we'll move on to our power rankings. I think we'll probably do this pretty quickly because we've probably touched on most of the things we already want to say about these teams, but we'll run through pretty quick from bottom to top and kind of go through our order. So I'll start. Number 10 for me is Dignitas. They looked horrible. They've benched their whole top side of the map, and I think they're pretty clearly 10 with a tier in between them and 9. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think Dignitas is by far the worst team in the league this split, and it's sad because they've been around for so long, and they always seem to give you the hope at the beginning of the split, but yeah, I just think they're not good this year.
To Ferris Biscuit, who's a dedicated Dignitas fan, I'm sorry. I'm sorry they lost River. I'm sorry they lost Johnson a couple years ago. Maybe one day they'll return.
Maybe. We can hope.
Number 9, I struggled with this one. I must have changed my mind in between the two segments because I put TSM here at 9. Even though they just beat Golden Guardians, I think these two teams are really, really close. I think a game between them is probably a toss-up. But TSM, I thought they were going to be good this year, and it just didn't work out. Tactical didn't work out. They've obviously got all those subs. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. I was like you in a toss-up here. I also put TSM here just because of the turnover and change that they've had with Hooney and his injury, and then Tactical not looking good and kind of splitting between supports. I think the only two players who have looked really good are Maple and Spica consistently, so I put TSM there just for consistency reasons. I think they've looked really good a couple games, but most of the other games, not so much.
Yeah, and looking from a fantasy perspective, Spica actually has been good. He's sitting at 7th, which isn't great, but he's only 1 point per game behind Jose, which is pretty impressive, especially considering that, the top lane for TSM has been the worst, the mid lane has been second worst, and so good stuff from Spica this year, despite
absolutely
it not really working out team-wise.
Yep, and then I also have Golden Guardians 8 as well, so I bumped them kind of down, just based on play.
Yep, and so I think it's kind of crazy that I have Immortals at 7, and I think you do too, based on what we've been saying so far, but 2 weeks ago we were declaring them absolutely dead, and they stuck with it. They didn't make any of these roster changes, and now they're here looking good. Yeah,
I think that they really have shocked everybody, because I think, like you said, I think we all kind of wrote them off. I had high hopes like you did with the Ignar kind of get in the off season. I was really expecting big things from them right from the beginning, and then it just didn't really happen. And so I was like, nope, they're done. They're washed. But no, they've looked really good since that break. And even though they haven't won a ton, they've really kind of, like I said, last week they were 0-2, but looked like they could have easily gone 2-0 the way that they played, kind of really kept with those top teams.
Yeah, for sure. I think this spot right here is the only spot that we don't know already from our previous segments. Number 6, I have FlyQuest. And so I think that I kind of hate having them here, but comparing them to the teams above them, They had an 0-2 week this week. I think this past week was where they could have really cemented themselves at the top. They've done a really good job this split of beating the teams they're supposed to beat, so beating those bottom 4 teams. But against the top teams, they've been iffy. They've won a couple, but not as good of a performance as you'd want, which is why I have them here at 6.
Yeah, this is where we do differ. I have CLG 6. For me, I like CLG. I think that they've beaten some of those top tier teams and really pulled off those upsets. But then at the same time, they've lost games that I feel like they should have won. And that's why I have FlyQuest higher than them, because I feel like you said, FlyQuest has been really consistent at beating those kind of lower tier teams. They've also beat some of the top tier teams, and they're right on that cusp, I think. I feel like with FlyQuest, every time you get to thinking that they're going to be great, they do not so good. And now that it's like, they're back to like maybe down, they're going to shock us and be good again. So that's the only reason I kind of put FlyQuest, give them the edge over CLG.
Yeah, I don't blame you, even though that's not what I have. I also have CLG at 5, even though I'm really hoping they make it to 4. I think that they can, and I think their schedule, I haven't looked at it quite as in depth, but I think it is a little easier than TL. TL still has that EG game. CLG's already played them. So I think that's the reason I put CLG to finish at 4, even though I have them power ranked 5.
Yeah, I think you can definitely go that way. And honestly, the team for me that is the biggest wild card that I think could fall pretty deep is actually that Team Liquid team. But obviously, because they have so much talent on that team, just can't bet against all of that talent yet.
And it's not even just the talent for TL, but the experience. I mean, you can't replace the experience of a Bjergsen, of a Santorin, of a Bwipo. You just core JJ, obviously.
Yeah, right.
You cannot overlook that.
Yep.
And then finally, top 3, I think we know. C9 3, 100 Thieves 2, EG 1. We already kind of touched on that earlier on. Anything more you want to add to one of those 3 teams?
No, I think we've really touched on it. I'm actually really big on C9. I don't know quite why. I think because of how dominant they looked this past week. Again, there was I think a couple weeks ago they looked pretty dominant and then kind of came crashing back with, I think, a really, really bad loss to FlyQuest after beating like a Team Liquid or one of those top teams. I can't remember exactly. But with how good that they looked, I think C9 could shake some things up going towards the end of the split and into playoffs.
Yeah, I think they're too far back at the moment to really compete for the regular season title, but come playoff time, they will be just as scary as any other team. I totally agree. We'll finish up here by going through our match-by-match previews. We'll touch on each game that's coming and give our predictions for who's going to win and what our favorite fantasy plays are. First game of the week, Golden Guardians versus 100 Thieves. 100 Thieves minus 275 favorites, which feels pretty generous to Golden Guardians. I give Golden Guardians no chance. I think 100 Thieves crushes them, but in a really slow, boring, and not fantasy relevant way. What do you think?
I completely agree. I mean, as a person who has FBI in a couple leagues and has someday in a couple leagues, I hope that they can score some more points. That first game last week, they scored a ton of points, which just barely carried me because they were so bad in that second game point-wise, even though they won. But no, I agree. I think 100 Thieves takes it easy.
Yeah, and someday, fantasy-wise, has actually been good. So he's actually the number 2 top laner. He's only 2 points behind Impact, which is actually the closest of any player is to an Evil Geniuses player. But across the board, otherwise, not so much. Closer has not been really good fantasy-wise.
No, neither is Abba.
Correct, yeah. And I had FBI number 1 overall to start the year, and he's been okay, but I also have him all over the place.
Yep.
Second game is EG versus TSM. EG minus 400, which also feels ridiculously low. What do you think?
Yeah, I think EG takes this super easily. I mean, who knows? I mean, TSM played well in their second game last week, so albeit against Golden Guardians, but I don't think they have a chance against EG.
Totally agree, and I think EG will rack up the points. I think they'll kind of style on them.
Yep.
Third game is Team Liquid versus FlyQuest. Liquid minus 205. Where are you going here?
Here, I'm going FlyQuest. I think after that really kind of embarrassing 0-2 last week, in which they just looked not good, I think this is going to be a bounce back week for FlyQuest. I think that they've got a lot of talent. And kind of like I was saying earlier, I feel like this is the trend with them is I get hope for them and then they let me down. And then I think that on paper they should lose to Team Liquid and then they're going to surprise me. So I'm going to go with FlyQuest in this one.
I like it. I hope it's true. And this is actually such a big game for both teams. I think that if FlyQuest wants any chance of finishing in that top 4, I think they probably have to beat Team Liquid, to be honest. And if Team Liquid loses to FlyQuest and then they have to turn around and play EG on Sunday, they're going to be looking up at a good portion of the standings.
Absolutely.
But I think Team Liquid will pull it out.
I hope not, but I could see that. I could see Team Liquid pulling it out. I think that's going to be, for that first day, that's definitely the hardest game to call for me. But yep. I'm still going to stick with FlyQuest in here. Yep. Game 4, Immortals versus Dignitas. Immortals minus 145. We've talked enough today to know that we're both picking Immortals. Absolutely.
Do you like them fantasy-wise?
I do. I've actually picked up Power of Evil in a couple of the leagues that I'm in where I don't have really strong mid lane. That was kind of the pick that I saved for the end. So I actually picked up Power of Evil in a couple of places just because I think that they're going to have a good week this week going against Dig and then Golden Guardians in the second game.
Last game of the day, Saturday, is CLG versus C9. C9 minus 200 favorites. Where are you going here?
Here I'm going C9. I think they continue to build off of last weekend, in which they really took it to two of the more top teams. Again, FlyQuest is kind of on that edge bubble, but I think the way that they played was they really kind of outclassed those games, so I'm going to go with C9 here.
Yeah, I think that's the technically right call, but I'm going to disagree. I'm going to go CLG in this one. I think that C9, obviously they've looked really good last week, the week before, not so much, but still pulled out the wins. When I look at their wins this week, the first game, I think it was just FlyQuest disrespecting the Olaf, just what he can do. They kind of went all in on him and then still all got killed. And then Olaf got a solo kill on Takuya later, which kind of just turned the game. And then I think the draft for Team Liquid versus C9 kind of doomed them. And so I think CLG has been really good drafting this split. I think they've been able to pull off some interesting things. And I think they're going to pull out something fun here that's going to kind of throw a curveball and help them take down C9.
I'd love to see it. I'd love to see a good, fun, interesting game.
Looking at Sunday, I think Sunday is maybe the best slate of games we've had all year. I think every single game's going to be close. First game is TSM versus Dignitas. TSM minus 200. What do you think?
I'm going TSM here. I just don't have any faith in Dignitas at this point.
Yep, I don't disagree with you at all. I think Dignitas has pretty much mailed it in, putting in some players in the future that aren't quite ready. Definitely going TSM. Second game is C9 versus 100 Thieves. 2 versus 3 in our power rankings. Both teams riding 4-game win streaks. 100 Thieves minus 122, so pretty close to a pick'em. Where are you going on this one?
This one I'm actually going 100 Thieves. As much as I love C9 coming out of last week, I just think 100 Thieves is just still slightly better than them. Still has the slight edge on them. So I'm going to go 100 Thieves here.
Yeah, I actually agree with you here. I think that 100 Thieves, the way they play is so controlled that they're going to kind of be able to bleed out C9. I think they're going to take this one not convincingly, but in a slow, methodical manner.
Yep.
Game 3 is Evil Geniuses versus Team Liquid. EG minus 190. Liquid, a game that they need to have if they want to get into that top 2. Where are you going here?
This one, I'm going EG. I just think EG is too good. And like I've kind of mentioned, and I think we've talked about so far today, that I just don't really like Team Liquid that much. I think EG wins this one pretty easily.
Yeah, I think that the strengths of EG kind of line up with the weaknesses of TL, which will be really interesting. I think TL, their laning phase has been pretty good. They've been able to get pretty decent gold leads. I actually think that's where EG is the worst. But then when you get to those mid-game fights where so many games are won and lost, Team Liquid's been looking really bad and EG's been looking awesome. And so I expect there to be a mid-game fight where EG kind of takes control of the game and wins it there.
Yep, I completely agree with that.
Next game is Immortals versus Golden Guardians. Golden Guardians minus 165, which is kind of shocking to me. I expected Immortals to be favored here. Where are you going?
I'm going Immortals. That kind of shocked me as well. I mean, I guess because Golden Guardians is still ahead of them in the standings, and Immortals lost 2 games last week. But no, I definitely think, and I think we've talked about this a lot, Immortals is looking really on the up and up, where I think Golden Guardians is trending down.
I totally agree, and I think that Golden Guardians still needs more time for River to get acclimated, coming off of a pretty poor week. But I tell you what, this is a hugely, hugely important game for the playoffs. Immortals currently 1 game back behind Golden Guardians, and I think that if they lose this one, then their chances of 7th are gone, and 8th will get way tougher. And so they need this one against Golden Guardians, and I think they'll get it.
I agree.
Last game is FlyQuest versus CLG. We've had this conversation a couple of times of which team we like better. It's almost a pick 'em. CLG very slightly favored, -120. Who are you picking?
Yeah, I could see this one going really either way. Again, I like FlyQuest just slightly better. For me, it comes down, I like Takui better than Palafox. And I think with the really down week last week, I think Takui is going to come out and play a lot better this week. And so I'm going to give the slight edge to FlyQuest, but I really think it could go either way.
Yeah, this is definitely one that is a toss-up to me, but I'm going to go CLG. I just like them. I like the way they've been playing. I like Dokla. I think that he's done a really good job of when he gets leads, he really pushes them well. I think Contracts, his turnaround from the spring has been really kind of incredible. And then Lucier, we already talked about his Draven game. I think that they've all been good. So
Yep.
Obviously FlyQuest has been good too, but in this game I am going CLG.
All right.
We're going to finish up here with our lock of the week and our fade of the week. Just going to pick a team or a couple players that we really believe in. We really don't this week. My lock of the week this week, it's Immortals. We've talked about it. They've probably been the team we've talked about this episode the most. Mm-hmm. They've got a pretty nice schedule here versus Dignitas and Golden Guardians, the 2 teams that looked the worst last week, coming off of a week where they actually looked really good, even though they got 2 losses. So I'm really high on Immortals this week. I would pick them up and play them definitely over any players of the bottom 3 teams. And with so many tough matchups, I'd consider starting them over some of the FlyQuest players.
Yeah, I really like Immortals this week as well. Like I kind of mentioned, I picked up Power of Evil in a couple of my other leagues where he was available for those kind of lower tier mids. I'm kind of split on dropping Takui for like a Power of Evil, but I definitely think with the strength of schedule this week that those could be safe picks.
Yeah, for the specific format that the sleeper leagues are, where there's no bench, I would definitely not drop Takui for Power of Evil, but I would. Yep. I do expect Power of Evil to outscore Takui this week, I should say.
100%. I agree.
My fade of the week, I think there are a lot of candidates for this because all the good teams seem to be playing each other this week. Mm-hmm. I know you're going to disagree with me here based on our match picks, but I'm actually going with FlyQuest. They've got a pretty tough schedule. We talked about Team Liquid in a pretty desperate situation, and CLG in a game that, again, it's a pick 'em, but I'm leaning CLG, and so I think FlyQuest kind of continues their struggle. You've already told me you disagree with that, but I'm avoiding most FlyQuest players if I can. Obviously, a lot of times you can't, but just lower expectations. I'm not big on FlyQuest this week.
Yeah, and I think that's totally fair. I think in both of those games, it can go either way. I was kind of high on FlyQuest last week, and again, it just didn't. Again, those games I think, were toss-ups going in, could have gone either way, and didn't go FlyQuest's way. That's why I kind of am a little bit higher on FlyQuest, and that's why I'm kind of down on Team Liquid this week. Again, they face FlyQuest, which I think is going to want to get after it, and then they face EG, so I'm kind of fading Team Liquid players this week just because, even just looking like we've talked about with their points, even in wins, they aren't great. And I think that these are 2 games that they could easily lose or go 1-1 in this week.
Yep, and 1-1 has been the name of the game for Team Liquid. I know in my Dynasty League I have Santorin and Blabber, and I'm going to go with Blabber this week. And so I don't disagree there. Well, we're almost finished here. Last thing I've got is I got to ask you a few questions before we go. Questions I've asked of every guest. And so here we go. First question, who wins the split?
I think EG wins the split. I think they pull it out. I could see 100 Thieves coming up on them to possibly take the split down to the wire, but I'm still going to go with EG. My mind might change after this week depending on how both teams play, but I'm going to stick with EG for now.
Yeah, but do you agree for playoffs too? Do you think they win playoffs?
I do. I think that they proved in the spring and at MSI that in those series that they're really good and they do a good job of making adjustments. And so I do like them when they get into those kind of extended 3-game series.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the smart pick. EG is, they've been so good, you can't really say anything else. What 3 teams are you picking to go to Worlds? So obviously you got EG, who are the last 2?
I'm going to go with 100 Thieves and Cloud9. I think that 100 Thieves is above kind of those mid teams that we kind of talked about that are all sitting in the middle of the pack there. And I do like Cloud9. I think there's a lot of talent on their squad, and I think they're finally putting it all together. So I'm going to go with Cloud9 in that 3rd spot.
Yep, I think that all makes sense. Do you have high hopes for Worlds? What do you think happens with NA?
I don't have a ton of high hopes for Worlds. Just looking at the play style, and especially now that we're in that Dynasty League, I think the LEC has kind of adopted the LPK play style a little bit better, and it's a little bit more aggressive, where I feel like the NA is really kind of holding out to that mid game. Their early game's really kind of slow. So I think if anybody has a chance, I like EG to kind of make a splash at Worlds, but the other teams, I think, watching LEC and just knowing what the kind of LPK teams are, I just don't see 100 Thieves or Cloud9 really making a big splash.
Yeah, some of those Korean teams, those Chinese teams looked really good. Gen G just took down T1. They've been looking really good. So I'm pretty worried about Worlds, but I will have high hopes because I have to.
Yeah, exactly. I really hope NA can really... that's why I really liked EG and MSI. I think that they did a really good job of making it pretty far and beating T1 in that one game and kind of showing that they can hang with some of those top-tier teams around the world.
As long as it's not G2.
As long as it's not G2, who's looked really bad, and I don't even know if they're going to make it to Worlds the way that they've been playing this summer. So,
true.
Yeah, we'll see.
All right, man. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciated our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm so happy that I was finally able to get on. I've been listening to your podcast since the Spring Split and loving everything that you do.
Well, I really appreciate that. We're trying to grow Fantasy LCS, and I've talked about it a bunch of times, but I think that can be an avenue that really helps the LCS, gain and retain viewers. I've talked about it 100 times, but there's only one reason I'm tuning into Browns versus Jets on Thursday night, and it's for my fantasy players. And so I think that's what we need to do.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's honestly what got me back into watching League. It gives you a reason to watch those games, especially if you haven't been watching all the time and you don't have, it's fun because even though I don't have an LCS team, I still really enjoy watching all the games during the week.
Exactly. Well, thanks again, man. And for those of you guys who are listening, I really appreciate you guys as well. If you haven't already, follow us on Twitter. It's at LFL Pod. Join our weekly challenge. Big announcement. We are going to add a prize for just this week. So the winner of this week is going to win a $20 gift card of RP to the League of Legends store. Excited to do that. Hopefully we'll get a nice turnout. Thanks again to everyone for tuning in. We really appreciate it. This is Pistons Wish and Odin signing off. Peace out.